Welcome to Real Talk and ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English.
See, we're aligned.
Yeah.
We're sick together. We have the same ideas. We can't sleep in the air conditioning anymore. Welcome to the podcast, my best friend. We're just going to be sneezing. Just mute yourself. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Awesome. Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. I'm here with Italo. Hi.
Hi.
Did I say it right?
Yes, it's Italo.
Italo. Yeah. I had a student years ago, I think it was Italo. And it was like, I couldn't figure out where to put the accent. Anyways, okay. For those of you who don't know Italo Sousa, he is crazy productive and has a very aesthetic vibe on Instagram. At his handle, it's Italo Reads, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but let me introduce you, sir, and then we'll get talking. You have 2 degrees in Letras and 2 postgraduate courses, English language teaching and English literature. You also hold the ECPE. For those that don't know, that's the Michigan, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And train the trainer. You teach bilingual lessons and also prepare students who are willing to take the Michigan exams, which if anybody's not familiar with them, because I think we always talk about Cambridge, it's like, it's the MET, ECCE, and ECPE. And that would be the equivalent of the B2, C1, and C2 exams, right?
Actually, MET is a exam focused on teenagers. So it is a different exam. It ranges from A2 to C1, MET Gold. And then we have the ECCE, which is a B2 exam. And then we have ECPE, C2 exam. We don't actually have the just C1 exam. You can add C1 if you take MET and accomplish C1 in the MET.
Got it. Okay. Works a little different. I'm not I'm not super familiar with the Michigan exams, but good, valid. I just exams are not my thing. Okay. So when it comes to your hobbies, needless to say, he is an avid reader. You can always see what he's reading on his Instagram, and you love reading journals. Speaking of journaling, you like to organize your routine through planners and notebooks. And I'm a control freak and I'm a planner, so this is going to be really fun. Also, just forewarning for anybody listening, we are both under the weather. Both of us have colds and we're sniffly. It was perfect timing. Thank you, Italo. Great. But we're going to struggle through because reading is really important. Actually, so let's just start with, how did you become such an avid reader? Because you read a lot. A lot, sir.
I do. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, my mom actually, she was trying to talk us, me and my sister, into reading. And she was like, if you come with me to that supermarket, you're gonna get a book. And then it was something that become like a habit for us, that there was the day in the month that were like, please invited us to go to the supermarket so we can get the book. Please invited us. And it was like, oh, today I have to go to that supermarket. And I was like, okay, I'm going with you. Because it
was like a treat.
Yes, because we knew if we would go with her, we would get the book. And then I started like saving my own money when I was in high school. Like, instead of buying food in a break time, I was saving to buy books.
So you were trading coxinhas for paperbacks. Yeah. That's what we were doing.
Yeah. Basically, my mom was like, "Ew, here are the money for you to buy your food." I was like, okay. I would buy something to eat, but like just half of the money. And
you were getting like the saltine crackers, weren't you? Like the cheapest.
Yeah. And then, like, in 2 weeks, I had money to buy 1 or 2 books. And I started collecting books on high school because my friends like to read as well. And then I decided to take Letras. And my first degree is Letras Literatura, because I was very, very interested in literature. And then I started studying literature, so I had to buy more books to read more books. And I actually became that avid reader also due to Letras, because we had to read like a lot. I remember that's the subject. I think it was Literatura Cearense, not sure, but I think it was. We had to read a book a week. Yes, every week a new book.
A lot.
And then
I mean, it's not a lot. It's not a lot if it's interesting. What kind of book? What kind of book were you reading once a week? Was it like a textbook or was it like okay.
No, basically romances, but focused on literatura cearense, because I'm Cearense. I'm from Fortaleza, Ceará.
Welcome.
So
one day I'll get there. It's very
please come, please.
Okay, anyways, we're gonna get distracted here. Oh God. I think it's also the cold medication too. We're like delirious about books and on cold medication. Okay, so you were reading a lot in college. And then how did that translate into you becoming an English language teacher? Because that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it lends itself, but it's not a direct connection.
Yeah. I was basically, I was a literature teacher and a Portuguese teacher back then, a long time ago. And then I started reading more books from British authors, and I remember that I was reading Daphne du Maurier, and I found out that she had written a lot of books, and I had just read like 4 or 5 because that's what was available in Portuguese. And I felt so saddened by the thought that I wouldn't be able to read her books because I didn't know English, or because I wasn't that good at English. So I started like studying English really hard to become a better reader, because I want to read something. And then in this process of learning more to read more, I was actually also changing my career and transitioning to being an English teacher and not a literature teacher, because I realized that really literature is like my hobby, not something that I want to make money with, like I don't want to make it like the thing I live, like I have to work with it. No, that's my hobby. I want to just enjoy it.
Right. You like to just consume it because out of the pure pleasure of consuming it. It's not that you want to like pick it apart and have it analyzed. I mean, sometimes that's interesting in having discussions, but interesting. So it was really because you were trying to gain access to things that you didn't have access to if you didn't learn the language. Okay. So did you find, well, now I have like a whole series of questions now. Did you find when you were reading reading books that were translated into into Portuguese, for example, and then after you learned English and were able to read them in English, or some of them, the ones that you mentioned, were originally in English. Do you think that was there a difference?
Definitely. I mean, I think many books that I read when I was reading just in Portuguese, my favorites I actually read in English later then. And I don't know why I ended up loving them even more than I loved in Portuguese. The language, you see, there's sort of like the underbelly of the language when you're reading the book in the original language, that I feel like, oh my God, this book is really good in Portuguese, but in English it's perfect.
Because there's like things that you miss, right? Like I remember reading Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist, in English, and I was like, no, it's a good book. I love this book. This is a great book, right? Okay, so I'm just sitting there, and then I'm not good enough. I'm not super good at Portuguese, but I started reading it in Portuguese and I was like, oh, this feels different. It's a feeling. It's not,
exactly.
I think there's like cultural elements and things that you really miss when you're not able to kind of read the text in the original way that, the author was kind of expressing themselves on the page. So.
Yeah. Even when I was like not that proficiency at English and I was reading books in English, I felt like I really loved it. And since I became like C2, I was like rereading them and I was like, oh my God, now I'm actually experiencing the reading of this book.
Yeah. It makes me think that I probably want to go back and reread a lot of books now, because I don't think we well, and I think when you read too, people who are readers have quite the imagination and they're quite creative people,
Yeah.
because they, like, because you're reading and it develops this whole world, and you're kind of in your own space. It's a way to kind of disconnect, I guess. But sometimes you're in a place or in a stage in your life that I don't think that you really can either understand it or deeply comprehend it, or maybe it doesn't connect to you because of your experiences. So I think that if
Yeah.
people start to get into reading, one of my favorite books that I've read and reread and reread, and I don't know why it's one of my favorite books, it just is, and I hated it in school, was To Kill a Mockingbird
Oh.
by Harper Lee. And I was like, I don't like this. This is so awful. And the way that they treat each other is awful. And then I read it now and I'm just like, there's something about it that I'm not romanticizing the scenario that it describes, but it just, there's something about it that I just love the way that it's written, and it makes sense to me, and I relate to some of the things, and I can see the connections. And so I think, as you grow older too, right?
And I don't know, sometimes you're mentioning that, oh, this book, I don't know why it's my favorite, but it is.
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite books, it has nothing to do with my reading taste, because PLL, Pretty Little Liars, is actually like the series that I love the most when it comes to books.
Oh, why?
There's only one word that I can describe those books. Home. I feel home when I'm reading them. I feel that I have a safe place to go to. I feel, I don't know, the characters, especially Emily Fields,
Okay.
one of the main characters.
Yeah.
I feel so connected to her and to the story that when I'm reading the books, I feel safe. Like I feel the safety coming through my veins. So I feel like, oh, now I'm better. So every time I have like those comfy books that I'm not feeling good, I read them. PLL is one of them. And people are like, Italo, isn't that the book that people are blackmailed? It was like,
It's kind of
not
dark.
that.
I was gonna say it's like a little nefarious. It's not like the most pleasant. Well, in that, I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird, obviously, like the whole scenario for To Kill a Mockingbird is horrific, and just ostracizing people and all that type of horrible treatment of others, and but yeah, gosh, it's weird, but there's like a connection. I get it.
Yeah, another book that I truly love is Wuthering Heights. That people tend
Can't
to
get into it. See, we're gonna disconnect here. I know it's a classic. I understand. I appreciate it. But I can't really get into it.
I have read it 11 times.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, that's fine. Okay, so we could go on and on about lists and things like that. So because you soireed yourself into English language teaching because you wanted to have that as a profession and this book reading and living in an alternate world kind of to yourself, and not work in the industry of that. So how does that translate for you and your classes with your students? Because this is going to sound really judgmental, but from what I've experienced here in Brazil, there's not many people who are really like avid readers. And most recently, I mean, this is not because it's Brazilian people either. I think that there's a technology trend that people are going digital and things like that. We saw the Livraria Cultura in São Paulo was closing, which is like this huge landmark. I mean, this bookstore is like on the famous avenue, and I've been there, and it's beautiful and huge, and it has all the books and the big comfy chairs, so you can kind of start reading them and see what you like. And it's closing. And so how do you connect with people? Because books don't seem to be, they're not sexy anymore. They're not.
I don't know. I do think that sometimes what happens is my students, see me reading. And it's a lot, not like me demanding them, oh, you have to read books. You have to read that book. And I try to talk to them like they see that I'm reading a specific book. And I was like, oh, what are you reading? Tell me. Oh, what? They call like Chuitalo. Chuitalo, I'm reading that book. It's about, I was, okay, great. Sometimes if I have the book that they are reading, I try to read along so we can talk about. I remember the last year my students were reading Percy Jackson, and I tried to reread because I have already read it. And I tried to reread Percy Jackson, The Lightning Thief, because they were reading, so we would have something to talk about. And they would feel motivated to read more because I was reading the book that they were reading, and we would have something to talk. Sometimes, I never forget the day, like just a little bit. I was teaching kindergarten, and I was always like holding my books. And once a student of mine asked me, why don't you read for us more? And I was like, why? And he looked at me and he said, he was like 5 back then. Because you're always reading a book. Like every day you're holding a book. Why don't you read for us every day? Or like twice a week? And I was like, because I'm not like demanding. They were seeing me reading and they were into reading because they were seeing me doing that. Sometimes
it's like you're a model for them. Like you're reading and it's something that's interesting for you. And maybe you bring the stories to the class or something like that. And then they see it and they're like, I don't want to miss out. What's happening there?
Yeah. And something that I do, and I think this is very important for all teachers do, I actually value what they read, because sometimes there are teachers or people that they try to say, oh, you're not reading a classic. You're not reading a historical fiction. You're not reading that kind of book. So you're not actually reading. You're just, I don't know. You see, and that actually makes the students makes them even more away from reading.
Absolutely. Oh my God, everybody has to read a trashy book, like throw away something. I think everybody reads those types of books. I know that. Yeah, I mean, even
I have a lot. Of course, I don't post on Instagram.
No, I mean, okay, yeah, I mean, but also you have to read things that are good and bad. I was thinking about this today actually, because the quality or the classics or whatever. Because I posted about this a few weeks ago, I think, about like I like the classics, but I like the classics because I think they're timeless, and I think it's interesting how someone, years and years ago can write about something that it seems very disconnected from today, but it's not. And so I do tend to like the classics because I appreciate it. I will read a trashy novel, though. I am telling you, I will go to the beach and read a trashy novel. That's not a problem for me at all.
Exactly.
But for you to really appreciate things that are good for you, which is very subjective, you have to experience bad. Exactly. Everything can't be wonderful, because then everything is nothing, right? So it's just like you have to kind of go through and find your style. And there's certain people that I cannot read, even if they are classic. Charles Dickens, for example, I cannot read him. It hurts. Absolutely hurts. I can't do it.
Literally.
Like it's just like, oh, this is painful. Am I going to take away that he was, he's a classic writer, and normally people have to read it at least in the American school system. I don't know anywhere else. Yeah, okay, great. Should you be exposed to it? Yeah, it's just not my style though. So like, let people read what they want to read.
Exactly. That is something that I learned when I was taking my first degree in Letras, because sometimes I was like, I knew that I loathed the book, but I also at the same time could actually say that the book was perfect and really well written. And I was like, this book is perfect, but I hated it. But it's perfect.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a perfectly fine book to read. The story makes sense. It's logical. You can follow it. Yeah. If that's the criteria that you're looking for, then fine. I mean, but there's also, what's his name? There's crazy crazy writers that it takes like you're like, I don't understand what's happening here. And so, but some people like the craziness of not having a very straightforward storyline. So
True.
okay. Letting them read what they want to read. Beautiful. Do you integrate a lot of like reading stuff into your classroom, or just the average for a normal English?
I actually do this more on private lessons when I'm reading, because when I'm reading a book, I try to highlight some things that are important for the story for me to actually remember when I finish reading it. But I also tend to highlight language. If I see a structure that I'm teaching, if I see a vocabulary that I know it's important for my student who is preparing for the exam, so I highlight, and then I use it on the class for them to notice the language as well. So I tend to highlight in two different colors, one color for plot, story, characters, and the other color for grammar, structure, vocabulary.
You write in your books?
A lot.
Oh.
Okay,
there's a controversy there, because sometimes people don't like to write in the books, right? Okay, so
I do.
Listen, they're yours. You do whatever you want with your books. That's totally fine. No, it's interesting. Because finding it in an actual book and the language is always kind of it's not super authentic sometimes, but it is, authentic language, and you can see like what's happening there. Sometimes it's a little contrived by the author, but because I have a friend who tends to do newspaper headlines constantly, all newspaper headlines. So if you find, like, if he's teaching something, he's always finding all the newspaper headlines he can that have some sort of language or grammar structure in there. So it's very relatable. Like, see, this does exist. It's not just in an English book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was like thinking of this because of inversion. Because when people try to make inversion something that, I mean, of course they are advanced structures, but they are used in everyday language. And books are there to prove that, because sometimes you can see in easy books inversions, and it doesn't make them easier, but it's there because it's language, and language is all connected.
It would be interesting to see too, because now we have authors that are coming out, some of them good, some of them not so great, and and we can see kind of the progression. It's like it's our way of looking at how language has changed. Have you ever used it in that way, where you've taken like one of those classics that we refer to, and then something that's more modern, and say, like, look at the conversations, or look at the use of language? Have you ever done that in a class?
Actually not, but thanks. That's a good idea.
Well, as we're talking, I was just thinking about it, because like it's our record. It's our record of language, right? Just like the internet is the record of all of the information, but it would be interesting to see how, like, if you're doing a unit on describing people, find a paragraph from a modern book and a classic on how they described
exactly
the type of person and what perspective it came from. Okay. Classroom ideas. Okay, so then when you do introduce these things, because we did mention quickly before we started here talking about like task-based learning and project-based learning, because you yourself, I think you do this because this is your passion, that you create these really lovely things with the covers, and then you put the title, and then it's if anybody hasn't seen Italo's Instagram, please go there. It's like visually, it's very aesthetic and appealing. It's just like nice looking, right? And so what got you started doing this? Like, what is this that you're doing with this, and why? Okay,
so to start off, I have always been obsessed with stationery since I was a kid. I remember getting my first binder when I was 9, and it was like the moment of my life. To be honest,
when I was little, we had Trapper Keepers. I don't know if you had them here in Brazil. Trapper Keepers. Do you remember them? They were like, they were these plastic, it's like a folder, like a binder kind of, and then it had the Velcro that like, and it had Lisa Frank with the unicorns and rainbows and super bright. I mean, I'm a kid of the 80s, so it was just like obnoxious Trapper Keepers. Very key. They were like the Brega version of what you're doing now. So they were awesome though. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. But basically, I remember like when I was 9, I get this first binder and everything starts. Because back then I was like, I remember begging my mom, please, I need it. And on my birthday, her best friend gave me. I have no memory from my birthday, but I do remember getting the binder. Anyway.
Well, points to parents. They don't really care. If it's something they really want, the cake doesn't matter. Decorations don't matter. Get your child a binder.
Yeah. And then I remember being organized at school because I have always utilized colored pencils and pens because I don't know why, but I couldn't focus when I was writing with just one color or just with one pen or one pencil. Like I couldn't differentiate what was writing, the information, the topics. For me, it's just like one whole thing. So no, I have to write like the topic, one color, the definition, another color, the arrow, another color. So I know exactly what I'm like looking for. Because if I'm looking for the black thing, it's the information. If it's the colored, usually it's going to be the headings, the topics. So I know exactly what I'm studying. So it's easier for me to study.
And did you like, this was just kind of a natural thing that you stumbled into, or is it something that I don't know, like a person, a teacher or a peer or classmate was doing with you? Because now lots of people are doing this where they, the bullet journals and all of that type of stuff. But this became a trend. But when you were little, was it just your natural inclination to do this?
Yeah. Basically, I was like the kid with 100 pens at school.
Oh, you were that kid with the big pencil bag, the huge storage that would fall and they would go everywhere. And then, okay, got it. It clocked you. Okay.
And then I went to college, and then the same thing. I was the Letras student with binder and loads of stationery. And they're like, Italo, why? Why? But I've always been doing that, and it helps me a lot.
And how does it help you? Because I think that sometimes people they're like, well, I do also like to organize things here, but I'm not as dedicated as you are in terms of like recording things because I am terrible at going back to them. I need to write things down and organize and visualize similar to what you do, but I infrequently go back unless I really need the information. So do you go back to it, or is it just something like you create and it's like, okay, peace of mind, and you move forward?
No, I do tend to go back, especially on my vocabulary notebook, which now I have to organize because it's not. But anyway, because I'm changing the notebooks, so like all the papers are anyway.
It's a little bit of a mess. It's fine. Yes. We're getting it in order. No big deal. So you do use them as a reference then. It's not something that you just make because it helps you in the moment. It's something that you refer back to.
Yeah. Usually when I need to write something, or if I need to actually talk to someone about that specific information, it's easier for me because like the title, it's big and very that information. And I have all organized. It's easier for me to go back and actually just read the thing I need, not like the whole page or the whole pages, because it's blue here, black there. Perfect. It's here what I have to read.
And have you done this with your students or encouraged your students somehow? Have they seen your stuff and then they say, oh, what are you doing over there?
They do. It was funny because I don't actually tell them that I have this Instagram. I don't. And then they always find it out. Always. And I remember once I get into the classroom because I teach 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. And 5th graders are always new because they are like the new grade coming. Once I get into the classroom, they were like, "Oh, you're the boy of the lettering, right?" And I was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah,
That's
you're
cool,
the
though.
boy of the
They
lettering.
kinda-
We follow you."
Oh,
And I was
that's
like,
good.
"Thank you." Yeah. Yeah. And something that I do when it comes to lettering in mind maps with my students is usually when they're closer to get their tests, I actually ask them to, in groups, create mind maps according to the topics. When it comes to grammar, that they have a lot of grammar to study, I divide them into small groups, and each group is responsible for one topic. Like, sorry, knock off.
That's okay. We're sick here. It's fine. We're struggling through.
But they are like, "Oh, I have to write about articles. I have to write about simple present." And they do like the lettering. I help them if they need to. And then they do like the arrows with the specific information about each topic. And then they share their mind maps. So they have just to make one, and they have like 4 or 5 in the end. Because
And how has that worked for them? Has it been productive? Have you seen like good, I mean, anecdotally speaking, have you seen good results from that where the sharing of the information has been okay?
Yeah, especially because when they write down on grammar, because they try just to read the grammar part, but not like actually write down, study. So when they do this, they say, "Oh, simple present is used for this and that. Oh, we don't use articles in this situation," because they are actually writing down and they are realizing what they can or not do with that specific verb tense, for instance.
And so do they explain it to each other? So they sit down and they kind of group together and they create their little mind maps. And then do they like, for example, do you do like a little hodizia where you take the like one from each group and then put everybody together and then everybody kind of explains what they did in their group, or no?
No, actually, I asked them to show theirs, and oh, that's what I did. That's what I did.
Mhm.
But in groups, they have to see which is the important information supposed to be there on the mind maps. So they have to discuss what they have to write, because I always tell them, you don't have to write everything that is on the book. You have to write what is important, what is necessary. So they have to analyze, see what is important, and they try to compare what is written there with the questions that they answered. So, oh, you see this rule here appears on almost all items, so it's important. Let's write it here.
Nice. No, it's a way of visually organizing things. I think mind maps, they're super helpful. I mean, and anytime we can kind of incorporate other ways of visualizing information,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. So this is how you do it kind of in the classroom for revision type of stuff, everybody collaboratively working on like, now we all have these resources.
Yeah.
Do you encourage them, and I don't know if you know about this one, but probably you do, the Cornell note-taking method?
Oh, yes. I've tried it once.
Okay,
It was
so
really good. I liked it.
because you're a huge note taker, so I'm wondering what
But
was
I've
your
used
experience with that?
I liked it. It was very different because I had never done the column thing to write. But then I actually tell my students that they are like, "Oh, Chuito, do you think I should do a resume or should I do a mind map?" And I was like, "It depends on you. It depends on how you're learning, how you learn." So I try to explain them all the methods I know and how they can apply that to their study things, but I don't say like, "Oh, you have to do this one or that one."
But do you have them try it out?
The Cornell method, I'm not sure.
It's the one with the columns and the one on the
No,
bottom,
yeah,
like you put the thing. But just
I've done that once.
mm,
I really liked, for me as a student,
mm,
because you can actually in the end summarize all the things that you're trying to write up there. So
right.
it's easier. But the one I did, I also did another time that I didn't summarize the information, but I actually divided into columns, which was for my vocabulary notebook. I put all the vocabs in one column and the definition on the other, according to the arrow.
Right.
Because it comes to the vocabulary notebook, I must admit that I'm a little bit control freak, as you mentioned in the beginning. Like, to be honest, I tend to write like, oh, this word is a verb. This word is the definition, one example in a sentence.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not just like a translation or, oh, the word is here for being here. I try to actually really analyze the word that I'm putting on my vocabulary notebook.
Well, the reason that I'm asking you all these questions, I wanted to have you on the podcast, well, because I'm also nerdy about the notebooks and stuff, but because I find that students don't, sometimes, we'll say sometimes, maybe most of the time, don't have note-taking skills. And they don't have study skills. And so even if we introduce things in classes, they might be writing it down on a piece of paper, or the dreaded, I'll take a screenshot or a picture. And I'm like, that is getting lost in your phone and never coming back out. I cannot judge because sometimes I don't go back to my notes either. But but I wonder, if we introduce things like this, though it might take a little bit longer, or we might cover less in terms of we don't have such a high volume or high quantity of items, perhaps, the quality of it is going to be better because there's a really like a deeper understanding.
Definitely. And I do believe that the way that they are learning in our lessons are going to actually enhance as well, because they are actually be learning how to learn, not only learning English, but learning how to learn, which is very important. Sometimes they, as you mentioned, they have this, oh, I read the whole chapter the whole night and I know nothing. I don't know anything. And I was like, maybe you're not the reader type for studying. Maybe you don't have to read. Maybe you're just like I have students that they just do activities. They just answer activities and exercises just for studying.
It's just like endless activities for them, and that's how they process.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, not at all. I was like, no way. I traumatized when I would just answer activities.
I'm not a very good reading and like retention person. I can read and comprehend, but read and retention, that those two don't go together with me. That's partially why I do podcasting and everything else that I do, is because I actually have to explain it. I have to verbalize what's going on in my head to be able to kind of make it make sense to me. Yeah. So sometimes, and some of my students in the past too have been, I know that there's no types of learners and stuff like that. I know, okay, but they need to, I got the theory behind it, but they have to move, because if they're very sedentary or if they're very fixed, they can't absorb the information. So if they do things, and this is why all of these kind of learning methods came out, right? Like TPR and yes, audiolingual and like drilling. Okay, so that's not for you, but because people were starting to see that people learn differently, and you have to kind of figure it out for yourself. But I do think that note taking, creating resources is something that we're behind in a little bit, that students don't have good references to go back to and to think about and to make notes and consolidate the information. So
yeah,
just okay, so now I do want to ask you about all of the beautiful things that you make. So how do you prioritize for you, let's say for you as a learner, because you're constantly looking for new language and things like that. I mean, we're always learning and vocabulary and things. So how do you do it in terms of you teach, you work, I'm sure you have a normal life, you're a normal person. Because sometimes people see it as extremely time consuming. So what's the process that you go through?
I mean, first, I see sometimes that people write after the lessons. They go to school, they go to college, they study like on a day, and then when they get home, they take notes. Those beautiful notes that I take while I'm studying on the lesson. It's not like I stopped the lesson or I take my weekend. No, it's the teacher is teaching and I'm taking the notes.
Okay, Anxiety Kelly already has a question. What if you miss something?
Actually, that's the thing. I don't miss because I have to write everything that the teacher is saying. I like to listen to them, and when they say something, I write down. Because that's how nowadays I'm a better note taker. So I know what to write because I have notebooks from like college that I was actually writing down everything that the teacher is saying. So I was like, each note take was like 2 pages. Horrible.
So
Nowadays,
you're actually summarizing too at the same time. So you're getting it, synthesizing it, summarizing it, and then writing it down. And it's like cognitively highly demanding. That's cognitively speaking, like if you have to receive the information, summarize it, write it down at the same time, and continue paying attention, that's a really high demand for students to do. So, so then because what if students haven't done it before, then it's like, well, then that sounds beautiful, Kelly. I can't do that. So then in the beginning, your notes were terribly long. But did anybody help you try and figure this out, or was it just practice made?
Practice. Years of practicing and years of like, Italo, you have to make it faster. You have to make it actually concise. Because I was writing things that in the end I wasn't actually using. So nowadays, basically, most of the things that I write down, I utilize when I'm studying, when I take a test.
And is it just things that you're summarizing while you're doing this? Because, like, for example, so you're in a lesson, you've got. I just picture adorable Italo sitting there with his huge, all the colored pencils and markers and everything, right? Okay, so it's just funny. It's just hilarious. Like you must need. First of all, how do you do this in the university desks? Because the university desks are like the size of less than the size of a piece of paper.
Like I actually would put my bind open. And I would take just the pens and pencils I would use, like 5, 6. And I would put like up there and I would write as fast as I could, not to actually lose the track of the lesson as well. But at the same time, I knew that I couldn't take longer enough to actually lost it. So it was natural, second nature to me doing this because I have always done that since school. My notes at school were like organized. I was like the high school student, the organized one.
Do you have students who are unorganized and you're trying to help them? Because taking good notes and having good references, as teachers, we know that this is important for them to have references. So how do you help your student? We got very off track. You can go back to what you were saying, but do you do things that you say, okay, so this is my experience. This is what helped me. Like, do you have like short activities where they have to take notes for like shorter periods of time, and then they can kind of like breathe with their brain a little bit?
Yeah, I do. When I'm actually teaching them, especially at school, they actually always ask to see my notebook because I have the notebook that I prepared the lessons. So if I'm teaching, for instance, addition to 5th grade, because I'm teaching bilingual lessons, math in English. So They're like, "Oh, let me see your notebook," and they're like, "Oh my god, it's so cute. I can do it." I was like, "You can. If I can, you can." And then they're like, "Oh, but look at my lettering. It's not good." I was like, "Do you think this is the lettering I was doing like years ago?" Of course not. It's years of practice. I'm crying. But it's been years. And then I
Yeah.
told them that it's not one day change. It's not like 1 week. Because sometimes I see that people, oh, my handwriting changed in 1 week. My lettering changed in 2 weeks. And for me, I don't think that the things happen this way. You don't like change that much in 1 week.
But then also there's the because
You can enhance.
lettering and calligraphy and all that stuff has always been very beautiful to me. Like I've always been like, ooh, that looks nice. I can't do it, but that looks nice. But people practice that. I mean, like if you look at
Yeah.
calligraphers, it's just like constant practicing of like the different strokes to make sure that everything is uniform. So, they can certainly print out those free handwriting, the little templates where you can
Yeah.
write over it and just like practice the letters to make it look beautiful, because then if it's beautiful, it is more motivating, isn't it?
Yes. And
Yes.
I see that when they are like getting their letterings enhanced, they feel this, oh, now I'm writing that. And the tip I give them was write it in your house. Actually do the lettering at home, because you're going to have more time. You can do with no pressure of the teacher saying, oh, you have just like 2 minutes to do that. So do it at home. And when you go to school, you already have all the decorated page you want to there for you just to write the lesson on it.
I have a feeling that some people might say making it beautiful is a waste of time
I
and
have
that
it.
it needs to be functional. How would you respond to somebody saying something like that?
It depends on the person.
Okay.
It depends on how it was said. Like the Italo version, the Italo reads version, it's not. That's how I learn. And that's how I maintain my notebook organized. But if I'm not that patient, I was like, it's my notebook, not yours.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly listen. I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's yours if you want to make it that way. But yeah, I think it has to have form and function, right? Like finding the balance, and everybody's balance is going to be just like slightly different.
Yeah, I always tell my students that I do it because for me it's easier to do it now. I take less than 40 seconds to do like one of those titles, less than 40 seconds. So I'm not wasting time, because they're like, oh, Italo, but making a letter is like a lot of time that you're wasting. I was like, 40 seconds? You cannot waste 40 seconds?
Yeah, well, everything has to be immediate gratification nowadays too. So, but one of the things that I've noticed too, because everybody wants to go digital, everybody wants to have everything digital, and I teach online, so everything is digital for me. I mean, sometimes I can see what people are producing, but most of the time it's in a digital format. They're not really, rarely are they taking pictures of something that they've handwritten. Do you think that because this big digital movement is going forward, we're losing, or we're at a disadvantage because we're not writing things down?
I mean, I have actually seen many people creating notebooks on digital, like on digital world, they are making on, like they actually buy it. You can make the cover, you can select the kind of page that you want to. And I was
No, I understand that, but but hear me out. Like, let's think this through for a second, because I'm just an old person. I think I have the soul of like a 90-year-old woman. No, because if you give me a book, and any type of book, either like a fiction, nonfiction, or a reference book, whatever, and I go through it and I read it and I kind of know what's in it. If you ask me, oh, can you tell me about da 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 da? I'm going to be able to flip to that page pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But if you give it to me in a PDF or a digital thing, I can't do
Get
the same. Like I can't flip. I don't know. There's something for me. Again, I'm a 90-year-old woman. So, but I can't do it the same. And so I think, I don't know, for me, it's like, well, I can just like quickly reference something. And with digital stuff, it's good. It's faster. You can search for things. But if you can't remember the word, like if I'm looking for a vocabulary term and I can't remember the vocabulary term and I don't remember exactly how the definition is phrased or the example that I might have put down, how am I going to search for that?
Yeah.
Can't.
To be honest, I've been intrigued. I've been actually thinking of trying, like, to see how it would be like one of those things digital, because I've never used a digital planner nor a digital notebook. But just because of that, because I don't know how I would, my digital handwriting, is that it? Maybe.
I guess, I don't know. Because they use the pens,
horrible.
right? And they use the little board where you can write on it. Yeah.
It's horrible. So I think that it did actually make me don't go for it.
Yeah, it's like you recoil a little bit. It's like, yeah, I'm just so used to doing it this way.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, practicality wise, if you have to move house, sir, how many boxes do you have that are going to be full of notebooks?
A lot. Many. Several.
Do you find it to be like inconvenient that you have this referenced somewhere, but you can't immediately pull it up?
Actually, this is something that I've thought of once, and I was like, let's pretend that this never happened, and let's pretend that I don't have like more than 50 notebooks.
But I just wonder, like, because I see the point of both of them, right? Like I see digital being very flexible and agile, and you can access it, and it's great. But then I also see I really still hold on to the value of like good note taking, making references, and having something that is like physical. You can go back to, you can, something, especially if you're studying. I mean, that's the whole point, is that you're able to find information when you're learning. Will Italo ever go digital?
Probably not. Not totally.
What about scanning? What about scanning in the things that you've had to have like a digital collection of it?
No, I like the paper. I like to like hold the notebook and to flip through the pages. You see, this is something that I love watching on YouTube. I write like notebook flip through, notebook tour, and I just watch videos of people flipping through their notebooks, like 30 minutes, 1 hour long videos. And I was like,
oh, you have
cute.
You have an addiction, sir. It's another level. I mean, but it does get you. I would say that probably the reason that you like to look at those things is that it's something that you can identify with, but it also kind of stirs the creative juices and new ways and new ways to use your notebooks, right?
Definitely, because sometimes I have a lot of notebooks and I use multiple notebooks at the same time. For instance, I have 2 planners that I'm utilizing right now, 1 notebook for my degree that I'm taking right now, another one for my post-degree course that I'm taking right now, another one for the school things that I prepare. So because I don't like, even though they are disc-bound system, so they can have all the papers together, I prefer to maintain each notebook for each thing. So I know each notebook I have to go to when I need specific information.
About lesson planning and calendaring, because you work at, obviously you work in a school as a teacher. And
Yeah.
so how does that look for you? And is it, well, it's probably not time consuming for you now, but is it a good use of time to kind of schedule things out? And for example, like when you have lesson plans, I don't know how frequently lesson plans change or if you have different ideas or if integrating different materials. And then so how does it look, kind of your lesson plan? And then do you ever go back to those and reutilize the lesson plans, or do you just plan them and then it's a part of your history?
Basically, the lesson plans that I do on my notebooks are basically note takes from the things that I have to teach, but I have already them written so I can post on Instagram for my students to have the information, extra information, or I can actually just revisit next year when I'm reteaching the topic so I don't have to rewrite. And when it comes to organizing the lessons, I do on planners and I use a vertical view like this because, okay, obsessed again. I have tried many different planners and many different views. And the one who actually really, really, really worked for me is the vertical view because I can organize the things like morning, afternoon, night. So all the groups I teach in the morning, I put a small dot with a dot pen and I write like 6th grade group A. I taught, I don't know, divisibility rules. 7th grade, I taught civilization, early civilizations. And then I know what I'm teaching. So no classes behind and no classes too forward. And I actually know when I taught it.
And how frequently do you update that? Is that like a weekly thing or a monthly thing?
Usually on Mondays, I decorate the pages.
Well, go ahead.
No, go on, sorry.
No, because I was going to say that because I know that some of my teachers that work for institutions, especially public schools or private schools, they have to submit all of their lesson plans for the whole semester. And I'm like, yeah, but what if what if you have to stop because the students don't understand and then you have to revisit something and then your plans aren't reflective of that? So is this more of an accurate record of what you're doing in your classes?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, like, oh, for instance, today is 16th. Basically, all lessons were reviews. So I write here, 16th, Thursday, all the groups I went and taught, I write review. So I know that on the 16th February, I taught review, which is lesson 4, for instance. So I know that next week, I don't have to reteach it because I have already taught it.
And then the thing that you said was super interesting was that you might share some of your lesson notes with the students.
Yeah, I posted on Instagram, and I remember back then during the pandemic, we had groups at school with the teachers and the students, and sometimes I would share like my note takes with them for them to study for grammar, vocabulary. Because Twinkle, you have it? I was like, yes, I do. Do you want it? And then I would scan it and send them. And I actually encouraged them, if they would do it, they could share on the group as well. They could share online. They could share with their friends. Because for me,
I see a lot of possibilities with that idea. Because imagine if you shared your notes as a teacher. So you plan the lesson, give the lesson, and your students are required or encouraged, we'll say, to take some notes, right? Because we want to have a record of learning. So that would be good if they took some notes. And then if they submit, I'm thinking about my students, if they submitted theirs to me, say, show me what you thought was important, and then I'll show you what I thought was important. And they can compare the teacher's notes to the student's notes.
Yeah. I have never done it.
That's a really good idea, Italo. Good job. No, isn't that would be really interesting? Because you would be able to see, like, I taught this in my mind, these were the key points, but maybe the students saw something else as being like really, really important to them.
And something that I actually like to show them when I'm showing my note takings is because I teach math, and they tend to think that math is just calculation. You don't have to write anything down. And I show them, no, you have something to write down here. There are loads of vocabulary that you must know before taking a test, before answering an activity. So there are a lot of vocabulary that you can write down. You can make something very interesting with math as well.
I'm getting a lot of ideas now, because I like the ideas of I like the idea of having good resources and resources for students that, I think note taking helps people become a little more autonomous, right? A little more independent. And
Definitely.
if they can find the answer themselves because they've done a good job of making a reference for themselves, I mean, that's like the ideal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be wonderful. So lots of ideas. Well, I don't even know how many things we talked about, but we went through lots of different stuff.
We talked a lot about a lot of things.
It's how it works, and then sometimes I get lost. But do you have any recommendations, because you do work as a language teacher? I know that you do work with some private students. Do you have anything for people who, because a lot of people both work in institutions, we're a little more structured, but with your private students, is there anything creative or interesting that you've found with note taking or notebooks that has worked well with your private students?
Sorry.
It's okay, guys. We're really we're coming to the end, and it's like the Hispanol is like almost over.
I remember that something that I have done with my students was I actually took the words and the definitions, but they were like cut out, and they were like matching on the floor, the word and definition. And then they had to actually glue, when they were sure that that was the word with that definition, they had to glue on the paper. So they were like keeping the definition, keeping the word, but they were not like writing down or that they don't like, or they were not doing something. It was different because they were like doing in groups. I also had something that my mother-in-law made for me, was I don't know, like a blanket, and we could actually glue letters, and each group
like
would
glue
be
or like Velcro.
Like Velcro. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Like,
So like you could take them off too. Okay.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I would give a definition, and they had to glue the letters and make the word of the sentence I was trying to say, but not saying. And each group would have one of those, and they would work independently. And then they would share their results to them, like, oh, you wrote that word. Why did you think it was that word, not that another word?
That's nice. It's like very interactive. I think, yeah, sometimes we get stuck in the 1 through 8, A through H match. You know what I mean? And you can do things that are a little bit more creative, but even while they're creating a resource too, right? So those two examples, it's interactive, it's dynamic, they're kind of figuring it out. And then something needs to go into the notebook, and it'll be memorable because probably they'll have some sort of ridiculous, like with the vocabulary, some ridiculous sentence or scenario that happened, and kind of marking that down will jog their memory a little bit. Those are fun. Yeah. I very much appreciate those. All right, sir. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I know that we are under the weather. I think we made it through though with
we did
pretty good vigor. I do want to thank you, and you are welcome back anytime that you want to talk about organization and different ideas of trying to make things creative and fun for learners. We'll put your social media in the show notes, but it's Italo Reads And who knows, there might be a new one on Instagram. Italo goes digital. It might happen. We don't know. But I do want to thank you. It's been a pleasure, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date, and of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.